Woman nursed a bear back to health. But what happened 2 years later shocked the entire town. The wind whipped through the pines, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sarah, her weathered face framed by a thick braid of gray hair, inhaled deeply, savoring the familiar aroma of the Montana wilderness. She adjusted the straps of her backpack and continued her trek up the winding trail, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves. Sarah, a woman in her late 50s, had always found solace in the solitude of these mountains. The quiet hum of nature, the towering pines reaching for the sky, the occasional rustle of a hidden creature, these were the companions she preferred to the hustle and bustle of human society. Years ago, after a painful divorce and the loss of her beloved dog, she had retreated to this small town nestled in the foothills of the Rockies, seeking a life of peaceful anonymity. She worked part-time at the local library, a haven of books and quietude that suited her introverted nature. Her small cabin on the outskirts of town was her sanctuary, filled with the comforting scent of pine needles and old paperbacks. Her days were spent tending to her garden, reading by the fireplace, and exploring the vast wilderness that surrounded her home. On this crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah had ventured further than usual, drawn by an unfamiliar sound that had echoed through the trees. It was a faint whimper, a sound of distress that tugged at her heartstrings. As she rounded a bend in the trail, her eyes fell upon a sight that made her breath catch in her throat. A small black bear cub, no bigger than a dog, lay curled beneath a fallen log. Its fur was matted with blood, and its breathing was shallow and labored. A deep gash ran along its side, evidence of a recent encounter with a predator, perhaps a mountain lion or a larger bear. Sarah's heart ached for the creature. She knelt beside it, her hand hovering over its injured body. The cub stirred slightly, its dark eyes flickering open. Fear and pain clouded its gaze, but there was also a flicker of something else, a desperate plea for help. Sarah knew she couldn't leave the cub to die. Gently, she reached out and stroked its fur, whispering soothing words. The cub whimpered again, but it didn't try to bite or scratch. It seemed to sense that Sarah was there to help. Carefully, she examined the wound. It was deep, but it didn't appear to have damaged any vital organs. With a surge of determination, Sarah decided to take the cub back to her cabin. She knew it was a risky move, but she couldn't bear the thought of leaving it to suffer alone in the woods. Lifting the cub gently, she cradled it in her arms. It was surprisingly light, its body weakened by injury and hunger. As she started back down the trail, the setting sun cast long shadows through the trees, and a sense of foreboding settled over her. She had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but she was determined to do everything in her power to save this helpless creature. Carrying the injured cub down the mountain proved to be a more arduous task than Sarah had anticipated. The terrain was uneven, and the weight of the cub, though slight, began to strain her arms. She had to stop frequently to rest, whispering reassurances to the whimpering creature in her arms. As dusk settled over the forest, casting long, eerie shadows, Sarah finally reached her cabin. The small wooden structure, usually a beacon of warmth and comfort, now seemed inadequate for the task at hand. She gently laid the cub on her living room rug, its labored breathing echoing in the sudden silence. Her first priority was to tend to the cub's wound. Years ago, she had taken a wilderness first aid course, a decision prompted by her frequent solitary hikes. Now, those long-forgotten skills came flooding back. With a trembling hand, she cleaned the wound with water and antiseptic, then carefully bandaged it with strips of cloth torn from an old shirt. The cub whimpered throughout the process, but it didn't struggle. Sarah was struck by its resilience, its will to survive. She named it Ben, a simple, sturdy name that seemed to suit its character. Over the next few days, Sarah's life revolved around Ben's care. She fed him warm milk from a baby bottle, coaxing him to eat with gentle words and strokes. She cleaned his wound regularly, marveling at the speed at which it began to heal. She spoke to him constantly, filling the silence of her cabin with stories and songs, hoping to soothe his fear and loneliness. Ben, in turn, responded to her care with a growing trust. He would nuzzle against her hand, seeking her touch. He would follow her around the cabin, his clumsy gait becoming steadier with each passing day. He would even try to play, batting at her fingers with his tiny paws. Sarah's heart swelled with a love she hadn't felt since the loss of her dog. Ben was more than just a rescued animal. He was a companion, a source of joy in her solitary life. But she knew that their time together was limited. Ben belonged in the wild, not in her cozy cabin. However, Ben's presence didn't go unnoticed. Her nearest neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a woman known for her gossipy nature and her aversion to anything wild, spotted Ben through the window one afternoon. Soon, the whole town was abuzz with the news of Sarah harboring a bear cub. The local wildlife authorities were contacted. Officer Thompson, a young man with a stern face and a by-the-book attitude, arrived at Sarah's doorstep, informing her that keeping a wild animal was illegal and that Ben had to be surrendered to the state. Sarah pleaded her case, explaining that Ben was injured and needed her care. Officer Thompson, though sympathetic, remained firm. He gave Sarah a week to prepare Ben for transfer to a wildlife rehabilitation center. Sarah's heart sank. She knew she couldn't fight the law, but the thought of parting with Ben filled her with dread. She spent the next few days in a turmoil of emotions, torn between her love for Ben and the knowledge that she had to let him go. The week granted by Officer Thompson passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Sarah dedicated every waking moment to preparing Ben for his departure, a task that felt like slowly tearing a piece of her heart away. She knew the wildlife center was the best place for him, a place where he could learn the skills he needed to survive in the wild, but the thought of losing him was almost unbearable. She started taking Ben on short walks in the woods, gradually increasing the distance each day. She taught him to forage for berries and grubs, encouraging him to explore his natural instincts. She even tried to teach him to climb trees, a skill that initially proved challenging for the clumsy cub. Despite the looming separation, these were precious days for Sarah. The bond between her and Ben deepened with every shared experience. They would spend hours in the woods, Ben playfully chasing butterflies while Sarah watched with a bittersweet smile. In the evenings, they would curl up by the fireplace, Ben's soft fur a comforting presence against her side. One evening, as Sarah read aloud from her favorite book of poetry, Ben clambered onto her lap, his head resting on her shoulder. He looked up at her with his big, brown eyes, and Sarah felt a wave of love wash over her. In that moment, she knew that their connection transcended the boundaries of species, that they had found a solace in each other that went beyond words. But time, as it always does, marched relentlessly forward. The day of Ben's departure arrived, casting a pall of sadness over the cabin. Officer Thompson arrived with a large crate, its metal bars a stark reminder of the inevitable separation. Sarah helped coax Ben into the crate, her heart heavy in her chest. Ben whined, sensing the change in her demeanor. He pawed at the bars, his eyes pleading with her. Sarah knelt beside the crate, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Ben," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Be strong, be brave." Officer Thompson closed the crate and loaded it onto his truck. As the truck pulled away, Sarah stood on her porch, watching until it disappeared from sight. The silence that descended upon the cabin was deafening, a stark contrast to the playful noises that had filled it just moments before. Sarah felt a profound sense of loss, a void that threatened to swallow her whole. She wandered through the empty rooms, her hand tracing the spots where Ben had slept, played, and simply existed. The scent of his fur lingered in the air, a bittersweet reminder of his presence. Days turned into weeks, and the ache in Sarah's heart slowly began to subside. She threw herself into her work at the library, finding solace in the company of books and the occasional friendly patron. She resumed her solitary hikes, but the woods seemed less vibrant, less alive without Ben by her side. She often found herself gazing at the mountain where she had found Ben, wondering how he was faring, if he remembered her. She knew she had done the right thing by letting him go, but a part of her longed for the day she might see him again, a hope that she knew was more wishful thinking than reality. 2 years passed. The seasons changed, painting the Montana landscape in a cycle of vibrant hues. Spring brought forth a tapestry of wildflowers. Summer bathed the mountains in golden sunlight. Autumn set the leaves ablaze with fiery colors, and winter blanketed the land in a pristine white. Life, in its relentless rhythm, moved on. Sarah, too, had found a new equilibrium. The sharp pain of Ben's absence had dulled into a lingering ache, a quiet sadness that resided in the corners of her heart. She had learned to live with the void, filling it with the simple pleasures of her daily routine. Her work at the library continued to provide a sense of purpose, a connection to the world outside her secluded cabin. She had become a familiar figure in the small town, known for her gentle demeanor and her vast knowledge of literature. The townsfolk, once wary of her solitary nature, had grown to appreciate her quiet presence. But even amidst the familiar rhythm of her life, the memory of Ben remained vivid. She often found herself reminiscing about their time together, the playful antics, the shared moments of tenderness, the deep connection that had blossomed between them. She would sometimes catch herself talking to him, as if he were still by her side, sharing her thoughts and feelings. One evening, as Sarah sat by the fireplace, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a shiver down her spine. She looked up, startled, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw Ben's silhouette in the flickering shadows. She shook her head, dismissing the image as a trick of the light, but a strange feeling lingered, a sense of anticipation that she couldn't explain. The next day, while browsing the local newspaper, Sarah stumbled upon an article that made her heart skip a beat. There had been a series of incidents in the neighboring town, involving livestock being attacked and property being damaged. The culprit, according to the article, was a large black bear, exhibiting unusually aggressive behavior. Sarah felt a pang of worry. Could it be Ben? She dismissed the thought almost immediately. Ben was gentle, playful, incapable of harming anyone. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each passing day as more reports of the rogue bear surfaced. The unsettling events began to creep closer to Sarah's town. Farmers reported missing sheep, and there were sightings of a large bear roaming the outskirts of the community. Fear and anxiety gripped the townsfolk, and whispers of hunting down the troublesome creature began to circulate. Sarah found herself caught in a turmoil of emotions. She desperately hoped that Ben wasn't involved, but the possibility, however remote, gnawed at her. She couldn't bear the thought of him being hunted, of the gentle creature she had nurtured being perceived as a threat. Driven by a mix of worry and a lingering sense of responsibility, Sarah decided to venture into the woods, hoping to find some sign of Ben, to reassure herself that he was safe and far away from the troubles plaguing the town. Little did she know that her search would lead her down a path fraught with danger and unexpected revelations. The familiar trail seemed different this time, the rustling leaves whispering secrets she couldn't decipher. Sarah, armed with nothing but a walking stick and a heavy heart, ventured deeper into the woods, her senses heightened, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of Ben. The forest, once a sanctuary of peace, now held an undercurrent of tension. The cheerful chirping of birds seemed muted, replaced by an unsettling silence punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig. Sarah felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being watched, but she pressed on, driven by a force she couldn't ignore. She followed the trail that led to the spot where she had found Ben 2 years ago. The fallen log where he had lain injured was still there, a silent witness to their fateful encounter. Sarah touched the rough bark, a wave of memories washing over her. As she continued her search, she came across a disturbing sight. A deer carcass lay sprawled on the forest floor, its flesh torn, its bones scattered. The sight was gruesome, a stark reminder of the predator that roamed these woods. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and dread gripping her. She knew she should turn back, but a stubborn determination kept her moving forward. She had to know if Ben was involved, if the gentle creature she had raised was capable of such violence. The thought was agonizing, but she couldn't ignore the possibility. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Sarah stumbled upon a clearing, and there, in the fading light, she saw him.
Ben.
He was larger now, his fur sleek and dark, his movements powerful. He was no longer the clumsy cub she had nursed back to health. He was a magnificent creature, a force of nature, but there was something different about him. His eyes, once filled with playful curiosity, now held a wary glint. His movements were tense, his muscles coiled as if ready to spring. He was no longer the carefree cub she remembered. He was a wild animal, bearing the weight of survival on his broad shoulders. Sarah watched him from a distance, her heart aching with a mix of joy and apprehension. He was alive, he was thriving, but there was a wildness in him that she had never seen before. Was it possible that he was the one responsible for the attacks? As she pondered this unsettling question, a sudden commotion erupted from the nearby bushes. A group of men emerged, their faces grim, their rifles held at the ready. They had been tracking the rogue bear, and they had finally cornered their prey. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had to warn Ben, to protect him from these men who saw him as nothing more than a menace. But before she could make a sound, one of the men raised his rifle, aiming it at Ben.
No.
Sarah cried out, her voice echoing through the clearing. The men turned, startled by her sudden appearance. They recognized her as the woman who had rescued the bear cub 2 years ago. Their faces hardened, their eyes filled with suspicion. "Stay back, ma'am," one of the men warned. "This bear is dangerous." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "He's not dangerous," she pleaded. "He wouldn't hurt anyone." The men scoffed, their disbelief evident. They had seen the evidence of the bear's attacks, the mangled carcasses, the damaged property. They weren't about to be swayed by the pleas of a woman who clearly had a soft spot for the creature. Sarah knew she had to do something drastic, something to convince these men that Ben was not the threat they perceived him to be. But what could she do? As she stood there, her mind racing, a sudden realization struck her. She had to show them the truth, the real reason behind Ben's presence in their town, and she knew just how to do it. The tension in the clearing was palpable. The men, their fingers tightening around their rifles, eyed Sarah with a mixture of wariness and annoyance. Ben, sensing the hostility, let out a low growl, his powerful frame shifting slightly as if preparing to defend himself. Sarah, her heart pounding in her chest, knew she had to act quickly. "Please," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "just follow me. I can prove to you that Ben isn't the one you're looking for." The men exchanged skeptical glances, but curiosity and perhaps a flicker of respect for Sarah's courage compelled them to lower their weapons. "All right, ma'am," the leader of the group said gruffly. "Lead the way. But if this is some kind of trick..." He let the threat hang in the air. Sarah, ignoring the implicit warning, turned and walked towards the dense undergrowth, beckoning the men to follow. She led them through a maze of trees and bushes, her pace quickened by a sense of urgency. She knew time was of the essence, that another encounter with the real rogue bear could have disastrous consequences. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a secluded area, a small valley hidden from the main trails. And there, in the center of the valley, lay a sight that made the men gasp. A large grizzly bear, its fur matted and scarred, was feasting on the remains of a calf. It was a formidable creature, much larger than Ben, its eyes burning with a predatory intensity. This was no ordinary bear. This was the rogue, the one responsible for the terror that had gripped the town. The men, their initial skepticism replaced by shock and fear, instinctively raised their rifles. But before they could fire, the grizzly, alerted to their presence, let out a deafening roar and charged towards them. Panic erupted. The men scattered, their carefully laid plans forgotten in the face of raw primal fear. Sarah, caught in the chaos, stumbled and fell, her ankle twisting beneath her. She cried out in pain, her heart sinking as she saw the grizzly bearing down on her. Ben, who had been silently observing the scene, sprang into action. With a ferocious roar that echoed through the valley, he launched himself at the grizzly, intercepting its charge. The two bears collided in a flurry of fur and claws, their roars shaking the very ground beneath them. Sarah, her pain momentarily forgotten, watched in awe and terror as the two giants battled for dominance. Ben, despite his smaller size, fought with a ferocity that surprised her. He was agile and quick, dodging the grizzly's powerful swipes, landing blows of his own with surprising force. The fight raged on, the air filled with the sounds of snarls, growls, and the sickening thud of flesh against flesh. Sarah, her heart pounding in her chest, could only watch helplessly, praying that Ben would emerge victorious. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ben managed to gain the upper hand. With a final, desperate lunge, he sank his teeth into the grizzly's neck, bringing the larger bear crashing to the ground. The grizzly, weakened and bleeding, struggled to rise, but Ben held on, his grip unrelenting. The men, having recovered from their initial shock, cautiously approached the scene, their rifles still raised. But Sarah, sensing the shift in power, waved them back. "Don't shoot," she cried. "Ben's got him." The men hesitated, their eyes fixed on the brutal scene unfolding before them. They watched as Ben, his fur matted with blood, his breath coming in ragged gasps, finally subdued the grizzly. The larger bear lay still, its lifeblood staining the forest floor. Silence descended upon the valley, broken only by the sound of Ben's heavy breathing. He stood over his fallen foe, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a primal fire. Then, slowly, he turned towards Sarah, his gaze softening as he met her eyes. A wave of relief washed over Sarah. Ben was alive, he had saved them all. She limped towards him, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. As she reached him, he nuzzled his head against her, a gesture of affection that belied the ferocity he had just displayed. The men, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and shame, lowered their rifles. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that challenged their preconceived notions about wild animals. They had seen a bear, not as a mindless beast, but as a protector, a hero. And in that moment, they knew that Sarah had been right all along. The aftermath of the confrontation was a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. The men, humbled by Ben's bravery and Sarah's unwavering faith in him, were quick to express their gratitude and apologies. They helped Sarah back to her cabin, their initial suspicion replaced by a newfound respect. News of the incident spread through the town like wildfire. The fear that had gripped the community dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief and admiration for the bear who had saved them from a real danger. Sarah, once seen as an eccentric recluse, became a local hero, her courage and compassion celebrated by the townsfolk. Officer Thompson, who had initially been bound by regulations, was now filled with admiration for Sarah and Ben. He used his authority to ensure that Ben wouldn't be taken away, recognizing the unique bond between the woman and the bear and the vital role Ben played in protecting the community. Life in the small town gradually returned to normal, but with a newfound appreciation for the wild creatures that shared their space. The incident with the rogue grizzly served as a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature, and the importance of understanding and respecting the wild. Sarah, despite the trauma of the encounter, found a renewed sense of purpose. She became an advocate for wildlife conservation, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. She emphasized the importance of coexisting with animals, of appreciating their intelligence and their role in the ecosystem. Ben, now a legend in the town, continued to roam the surrounding woods, but he often visited Sarah at her cabin, their bond strengthened by the shared experience. He became a symbol of the town's resilience, a reminder of the unexpected ways in which nature can surprise and inspire. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah sat on her porch, watching Ben playfully chase butterflies in her garden. A group of children approached her cabin. They were eager to hear the story of the brave woman and the bear who had saved their town. Sarah, with a warm smile, invited them to sit with her, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, she recounted the tale of their extraordinary adventure. The children listened with wide eyes, their imaginations ignited by the story of courage, loyalty, and the enduring bond between humans and animals. And as the stars twinkled in the night sky, Sarah knew that the story of her and Ben would continue to be told, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring magic of the wild. The years that followed were a time of peace and contentment for Sarah. The once solitary woman found herself embraced by the community, her cabin a frequent gathering place for the townsfolk. Children would often visit, eager to hear stories of Ben and his adventures, their laughter filling the once quiet rooms. Sarah, in turn, found joy in sharing her knowledge of the natural world, teaching the children about the animals that inhabited the surrounding woods, instilling in them a respect for the delicate balance of the ecosystem. She became a beloved figure in the town, her wisdom and kindness touching the lives of everyone she met. Ben, though a wild creature at heart, remained a constant presence in Sarah's life. He would often visit her cabin, his arrival announced by a gentle scratching at the door. Sarah would welcome him with open arms, their reunion a ritual of affection and trust. One winter evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Sarah found herself feeling unwell. A fever gripped her body, leaving her weak and disoriented. She stumbled to the bed, her head pounding, her vision blurred. She knew she needed help, but the storm made it impossible to venture out. As darkness closed in, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. She felt a deep sense of loneliness, a fear that she might not see the morning light. But then, through the haze of her fever, she felt a familiar presence beside her. Ben, sensing her distress, had braved the blizzard to reach her. He nudged her gently with his nose, his warm breath a comforting presence against her cheek. Sarah, with a surge of gratitude, reached out and stroked his fur, finding solace in his unwavering loyalty. Ben stayed by her side throughout the night, his presence a beacon of warmth and comfort in the midst of the storm. As dawn broke, the blizzard subsided, and Sarah, her fever broken, awoke to find Ben curled up beside her, his watchful eyes filled with concern. The townsfolk, worried by Sarah's absence, ventured out to her cabin once the storm had passed. They found her weak but recovering, Ben faithfully guarding her bedside. The doctor was summoned, and Sarah, thanks to Ben's timely intervention and the care of her community, made a full recovery. The incident served as a powerful reminder of the profound connection between Sarah and Ben, a bond that transcended the boundaries of species. It was a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty, a story that would be passed down through generations, a legacy of compassion and the enduring magic of the wild. In the years that followed, Sarah and Ben continued to share their lives, their bond a source of inspiration and wonder for all who knew them. And when the time finally came for them to part, they did so peacefully, their spirits forever intertwined in the heart of the Montana wilderness.